In this hour, we're talking about reparations. It's definitely on the minds of those legislators in Tennessee who have decided that Shelby County, a predominantly Black county, doesn't have the authority to even study reparations, and definitely not the authority to pay reparations to formerly enslaved descendants of formerly enslaved people. And we're seeing this movement by GOP legislators happening in many parts of the country where they're trying to get ahead of some of their local cities that happen to have created commissions and groups to study reparations. This is happening in Missouri, St. Louis, a predominantly Democratic and uh, heavily Black city. Its mayor, Tashara Jones, created a reparations commission. They're going to read out their findings in July of this year. But Missouri also is attempting to prevent cities like St. Louis from paying reparations. Reparations, unfortunately, is the issue, the civil rights issue. I would submit as a civil rights lawyer, it is the civil rights issue of the day. We've seen reparations plans put in place in places like Evanston, Illinois, and some other cities around the country. And right here in Palm Springs, California, where I'm in Los Angeles, California, I've been working myself on a reparations action. And just last week, Thursday, news broke that the city council members of the city of Palm Springs had voted to, for the first time in the 2 years that we've been fighting, to craft a reparations plan that would include cash payments to survivors and descendants of what we call Section 14. It was the area in Palm Springs that was burned out, targeted by the white city government, and burned out homes of Black and brown residents in the 1950s and 60s. The Attorney General for the state of California did an investigation called What Happened to Those Families, a City Engineered Holocaust. And although the city of Palm Springs 2 years ago issued an apology to my clients, over 1,000 survivors and descendants, it didn't do much else. It just issued that apology. And we've been fighting for 2 years, trying to get them to recognize their obligation to make restitution. It's not your typical reparations action. I call it the cousin to reparations, because this is a very narrowly tailored action and very specific actions taken against a very specific group of people. We're able to identify who these people are. We're able to use experts to determine what their losses are. So it's not related to these individuals being, the descendants of formerly enslaved people, although a lot of my clients are just that as well. But these actions where folks around the country are realizing and finding their voices and demanding that cities and counties, and in some cases states, make them whole, provide some kind of reparative justice for racially discriminatory actions that were targeted primarily towards Black folks, that resulted in the loss of property, of land. We've seen this with Black farmers in the South. We see actions all over this country where folks are saying, you know what, you stole either our labor, as in the case of Jesuits. A case I'm handling out of St. Louis involving St. Louis University involves billions of stolen wages from formerly enslaved people by the Jesuits to build St. Louis University. So whether it's requests and demands for repayment in instances like that, or like we see in California, where a reparations committee met for 2 years and said California should pay reparations to formerly enslaved people. This reparations movement has taken foot and taken hold, I would say, in the country, and there's no stopping it. There's no turning back now. And I'm glad in this hour I'm going to be joined by Dr. Robert Turner. He is a pastor, and he's out with a new book called Creating a Culture of Repair, Taking Action on the Road to Reparations. We're going to talk about his involvement with Tulsa and some of the survivors of the Greenwood Massacre, talk about what he's been doing once a month in terms of how he is demonstrating and raising awareness about the need for reparations. Also in this hour, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, who is a board member for the National African American Reparations Commission, is also joining us. She'll talk to us about what's happening on the federal level around reparations and what we can expect from some of these local actions, like some of the ones that are happening in Shelby County, Tennessee, St. Louis, Missouri, and cities really all over this country. So it's such an interesting topic, a topic that if you haven't thought a whole lot about, I encourage you to start thinking about it because if reparations hasn't happened in your community yet, it is likely to be happening in the very near future. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me in this hour. We have been in this conversation before about reparations, but this time, Pastor Turner, you are taking your reparations activism to a new level with a new book. Tell us about your book. When does it hit the book stands? How people can purchase it, and what they're going to find when they do get their hands on a copy of it.
Thank you. How are you? And glad to be on your show. Dynamic, powerful attorney, Areva Martin, and along with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Julianne Malveaux. This is the book that I have, Creating a Culture of Repair. It will be available at every bookstore on April 24th of this month. It took me 3.5 to 4 years to write. Started it when I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and finished it here in Baltimore. It is the longest list of reparatory ideas by an individual in the country. California, the task force has 125. In my book, there's 100 stated, but within each one, there are others as well. And it breaks down the historical need for reparations, and it breaks it down uh, with the UN categorization of what reparations actually is, um, and also sensitive to what people like NARC have stated what reparations is. But in addition to that, it breaks it down into 4 categories of what individuals can do who are tired of waiting on their government, what the society can do, what community members can do, what institutions can do. To me, the truest form of reparations, what institutions like the government can do, and what spiritual reparations looks like, because we do know that it was faith communities who upheld and sanctioned, unfortunately, slavery and a lot of racist thought still to this day that has not been atoned for. And like the Catholic Church, who has given paper orders and they still not given reparations for what they've done. So all that's in this book under 200 pages, right at 187 pages, and it has a discussion catalog to go with it for small groups and things of that sort. So I'm excited about it.
I'm really glad, Pastor Turner, that you focused on individuals and what individuals can do, because oftentimes I think when people hear the term reparations, they think of it as something that's so overwhelming. They get caught up in, not only what does it mean, but who should receive it? How can I have any influence on it? It's something that a big government has to do. And if my government isn't taking any kind of action, then there's nothing that I individually can do. And your book goes beyond that and really defies that notion and gives individuals some really concrete examples of what they can do in their own communities for repair. And we've seen some of that. We've seen individual family members who families benefited from slavery, actually taking monies from their family's trust or their family's, the money that they've inherited from their family to pay college tuitions for students, or to, in other ways, try to enhance or enrich the lives of, the descendants of formerly enslaved people. So thank you for writing this book and for recognizing that, reparations doesn't have to be some lofty idea that only can be addressed by some big institution like your city or your state. Dr. Malveaux, though, talking about cities and states, the state of Tennessee is trying to prevent the work that Shelby County, we know is where Memphis is. We know it's a predominantly Black county. We know it's a progressive county, but happens to be in a red state. And they have set aside $5 million to study reparations. And then you have the Tennessee state legislators who are, mostly white, mostly GOP, saying we are going to stop our local municipalities from even studying or paying reparations. And we see this kind of tension between democratic cities and red led states happening, not just in Tennessee, but I mentioned Missouri and some other places. So, what can we expect to happen with cities like or counties like Shelby County, who are trying to move forward on this issue, but yet they're running dead smack into these GOP legislators?
Well, Areva, we've talked about this on many occasions. I want to greet my brother, Reverend Turner. I'm so proud of him and the work he's doing, walking 40 miles once a month in sweltering heat on one occasion. I think we're going to have to bring the brother back from the dead in August because he came to us sweating, 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 but he came. But he came, and that's just so important. And he is very important in this movement. What has happened? There is an anti-blackness that has taken over our nation. And we see it in so many ways. Areva, we see it with the attacks on Black women. We can talk about young, lovely Angel Reese and the horrible death threat she got just because she was as good as that Caitlyn person. Um, you know, just because she was as good as and beat her on one occasion, she got death threats because she's an excellent basketball player. We know about what happened with Dr. Claudine Gay at Harvard. Uh, we know what happens daily with our Vice President Kamala Harris and the kind of attacks that she receives. And so, in this context of anti Blackness, these folks want to repudiate or erase whatever has happened to us. They don't want to talk about it. They want to take it out of the schools. We've seen the 1,600 books that have been banned, including books by Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and others. We've seen number one, first we had legislation that says you can't teach CRT. Well, that's critical race theory. Nobody is teaching that to fourth graders. CRT, critical race theory, is a legal concept that you might get in your senior year of college. You might get, or you have to go out of your way at a law school to take that particular class, which is not required for graduation. Now there is an anti-DEI movement, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm going to ask those who are tuned in, please don't say DEI, say diversity, equity, and inclusion, because these folks are expert at crafting nonsense. So they will say DEI, and so, oh, that means Black people are taking over. No, it means diversity, equity, and inclusion. Are you against equity? Are you against inclusion? So, but in any case, that's a new wave of legislation. And so, in the middle of this, in Tennessee, you have these legislators who say you can't talk about reparations. And it's passed the one house, it'll pass the other this week. We have to fight. This is just a signal to fight back. We know what real is. I mean, congratulations for the last thing that happened in Section 14, Palm Springs, where they did agree that they're going to do something. Now, something is always amorphous. And as you and I know well, we talk about money and Black people in the same sentence, white folks get real nervous. But they're like, what do you mean give the Black people money? Well, you burnt their houses down, y'all. But they get real nervous about that. And we have to resist that. The Tennessee legislation is absurd. I have the privilege of talking to the brother, and his name escapes me now, who is leading the charge in Memphis. He's a pastor, and he's leading the charge to say, But the fact is that this is a super majority, a super Republican majority, both houses and the governor. And we know what they've done in Tennessee. They've dissolved the board of Tennessee State University, a historically Black land-grant college, dissolved the board, kicked the students off the board to just move ahead. So what we have to be able to do and say is this is unacceptable. Racial violence is real. Reparations, in the book I'm working on, the lynching culture, the wealth gap and reparations. A lynching culture says that white people can do whatever they want to Black people with no consequences. That gives you a wealth gap and inequality in law and makes a case for reparations. And so that's where we are. Reverend Turner, I'm looking forward to your book. You better send me one. But Reverend Turner is brilliant, and he's been doing this work. Areva, you've been doing this work. We've all been doing this work, but there is a resistance to history. There's a resistance
Yeah.
to truth. They don't want to hear it because and nobody's trying to make little white children feel bad. Let's just, this is history. You don't have to
I'm so
feel
glad you said that. Julianne, you definitely, tied all of these movements together, and at the core is this anti-blackness, this backlash that we're seeing after George Floyd's murder, when white people believed that somehow black people had gotten too much and they needed to snatch it all back. Dr. Turner, Julianne talked about your march, your 40-mile-a-month march. Tell us about that, why you started it, and what you hope you are accomplishing by making such a incredible personal sacrifice.
Well, first and foremost, it is a spiritual act of divine witness, in the vein of Richard Allen, a Frederick Douglass, a Harriet Tubman, and contemporary people like the late great legend Chip Murray, Los Angeles, who we miss and will always remember for the great civil rights work, human rights work he did in California. Every generation has somebody that's willing, thankfully, to be a voice, right? And this work of repair, it is one that sometimes it can get lost in the in the chaos of the needs of black people. We need so much. Sometimes it's hard to remember the oldest crime against us. There are so many, but the oldest crime against us is the fact we were kidnapped commodity here, and we have never been repaired from that. And so to remind America, to remind our people of the horrors of what has happened, and the promise that this country made to us, that they said that they were going to give us in Sherman Field Order Number 15, 40 acres. That was an actual legitimate governmental initiative signed off on by Secretary of War Stanton, approved by then President Abraham Lincoln. And so this walk, 40 miles, is actually 42.9 miles to the White House, where I carry a wreath of over 400 flowers, roses, symbolic of the 400 years of oppression in this nation. And I lay that wreath at the fence of the White House.
Mm.
And I pray and I read scripture. And just as Joshua walked around the walls of Jericho, I now will be, Lord, if Lord blesses me to finish it this Thursday, I would have walked it 19 times.
Wow. Wow, that is so incredibly impressive. And we know, as you said, those great civil rights icons whose shoulders we all stand on, they made personal sacrifices, whether it's, sacrificing time with their families, sacrificing jobs, sacrificing money, sacrificing, their bodies. In this case, you're walking 42 miles, which, as Julianne reminded us, sometimes in the hottest of weather. And we're grateful for your witness. We're grateful for you standing up in the way that you are doing, both in Baltimore and the way you did in Tulsa. When we come forward, I want to talk about how reparations is playing out in different parts of the country, and then with younger people in particular, and why this election year, is so important to the continued efforts of those who are fighting for reparations. I want to ask you, Pastor Turner, you pastor a church in Baltimore. You were a pastor of a church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You were involved in the lawsuit that's now before the Tulsa, Oklahoma Supreme Court. And that case is really about whether the descendants or the remaining, I should say, survivors of the Tulsa massacre can recover from the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Unlike Palm Springs, the city of Tulsa has been unwilling to negotiate at all with the survivors, forcing them to go through the full legal process. In my case, in Palm Springs, as I said, we've had a major breakthrough, nowhere near finished, haven't crossed the finish line, but we have an opening offer that does put cash payments at play, which is always a big issue in these kinds of cases. So we're going to be continuing to negotiate and hopefully in the next 30, 60 days in Palm Springs, have a resolution that really reflects what should be done in this case. But let me ask you about young people in particular, since you're pastor of several churches. I don't get the sense that this issue, this urgency around reparations that folks like you and me and Dr. Malveaux and others feel. Talk to us about what you see when you're out doing those walks, those 42-mile walks to the White House, or when you're in your church talking about reparations. What's the feedback from younger folks, particularly younger Black folks?
Well, first, I want to just commend you. I don't know if your audience was, because you spoke about it so matter of fact and candidly, and as if it wasn't such a big deal. But like what you're doing in Palm Springs is incredible. The fact that you already, have them, and I mean, already have them willing to give payments, right? That's a big deal, and I commend you for the
Mhm.
champion for justice that you are. That would be groundbreaking. That by itself, in a lot of places, is a victory. In Tennessee, that's a victory, right? Because they're trying to keep it from tax dollars from being utilized in the first place for reparations. So that's a big combination, and that helps carry the conversation forward even far,
Thank you.
even for more people to find out about. As it relates to young people, um, I've seen both ends of it. I mean, admittedly, I'm 40 and I'm 41. I started this walk on the eve of my 40th birthday. 40 for 40 had a lot of symbolism for me. Um, but I have also seen that young people who are aware about what has happened. I will never forget. I mean, it happens all the time now when I meet young people as I'm walking by and they see my sign as they showing right now. I am so tired in this picture, my feet are killing me. Matter of fact. And when they find out that a young man is walking this far for reparations, they're like, what is that about? And once they find out, really about what happened to us, because our history is not being taught in school. That's why I agree wholeheartedly with what Dr. Malveaux stated, about this whole critical race theory is a facade. They really just don't want Black history taught. No, I'm sorry, Black suffering taught, because it's American history. They don't want Black suffering taught. And so our young children don't really know, and they've gone, especially those who've gone to integrated schools, they're not taught Black suffering. They're not, I mean, they're taught the suffering of the Europeans. They're taught the suffering of, in some cases, indigenous Americans. But they don't learn suffering of Black people. And so that's the ones that I found that may not be as passionate about it as I am, are those who just really need more education. And the other group are those who think that we've already made it. And that's a whole other conversation. And they think that, reparations is almost an insult to them, because
Mhm.
it's saying that you need something. And I have to remind them it's not about what we need, it's about what we deserve, and how this country has given reparations to other groups. When I mention how other groups have gotten it, for instance, today, April 16th of 1862, DC, slavery was abolished in DC. This day, April 16th in 1862, slavery was abolished. And the US government gave the slave owners $300 per slave.
The slave
$300.
owners, the slave owners.
Exactly. They gave the
Mhm.
slave owners $300 per slave. And today
Mhm.
that's about $9,200 and some change, $9,200 per slave.
Mhm.
And the slaves who were working, the enslaved people who were working, got nothing. And a lot of them had to stay on the plantation as sharecroppers because they knew nothing else to do.
Yeah, it's really important that you note that, because and some people may ask, well, why were they paying the slave owners? And the simple reason is commerce, is that
Precisely.
enslaved people were commodities. They were the property.
Mhm.
And it was a thought, let's compensate. You lost your property. When you lost your
Mhm.
control over that enslaved person, it was like losing property. Dr. Malvo and I were at a teach-in in St. Louis a couple of months ago, and Black uh, history, or yeah, Black history professor put it best. He says Black people came to this country and they were thought of like a chair. And
Mm.
so if you think of, we were chairs, and somebody is taking your chair away from you, the government is now compensating you for that chair. Uh, Dr. Malvo, so Dr. Turner, Pastor Turner says that some young people feel like they don't want reparations because they've arrived. They don't need anything. They think it's some kind of stigma associated with it. It says that they're less than. They bought into these talking points that says that, if you're really successful in this country, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Is that also a pervasive uh, sentiment amongst, I'll say, those over 40, those over 50? So is that, because I can't imagine that this is just the thoughts of younger people. What do you encounter across the country as you travel, having this conversation amongst those folks who are in their 40s and 50s and older?
A plurality, Areva, a plurality of African American people support reparations, but not an overwhelming majority. Many Black people, we don't need it. There's also an enormous amount of shame attached to having been enslaved.
Mm.
So people don't want to talk about that. Or with lynching, there in Rosewood, Florida, there are people who know about what happened, older people, some deceased, but older people, but they won't talk about it. They know that the white woman who told the lie about a Black man raping her when it was her white lover who raped her, and she didn't want her husband to know that she had a dude on the side, and so she blamed it on a Black man. But people knew about it. There was a Black woman who was in the yard at the house who knew what happened, but was afraid to say. So there's fear and shame and all of that connected. And a lot of people just don't want to talk about it. It is painful. There's a book called Lynching as Spectacle, which it talks about how the shame is attached and people wouldn't talk about it. Now, years have passed, of course, but even still, there is a reluctance to talk about what happened. And so there are many who just say, let's just forget about it. But how can we forget about it when it left us with a wealth gap? With a wealth gap that affects our day-to-day lives, and with public policy, like the Fair Housing Administration that redlined us out of a lot of stuff. And I could go down the list. A GI Bill that excluded Black people from the benefits of education. You can't forget about it, but many would like to. And it's frightening, but it's real. People who are traumatized, and our people have been traumatized. How do you want to continue to relive the trauma, or would you like to say get over it? I testified before Congress on June 19, 2019, something that Dr. Daniels and Sheila Jackson Lee put together about reparations. And one of the interesting things was the two Republican witnesses. You know the system better than I do. Whenever you have a hearing, the other side gets to put some people on there. So they found two fools, a young brother who he didn't need reparations. He was also caught pole dancing somewhere on a subway. So, but he didn't need reparations. He thought everything was going to be okay. And an Army fellow who said he would be ashamed to accept reparations. Well, what is the shame of getting basically the results of your parents, grandparents' labor? What is the shame in that? There is no shame. And so there are a lot of Black folks who just feel extraordinarily ambivalent. There I am being all animated. They're like, you could calm down. I'm like, nah. But there's a lot of ambivalence about reparations because the ambivalence is about what happened to us and how we don't want to own it.
No, really excellent points, because it helps, I think, us frame and give grace, right, to those people who are still dealing with the racial trauma. And we know from Dr. Cheryl Grills that racial trauma is generational. So even though we weren't enslaved, those of us who are on this conversation, those of us who are watching and listening, we weren't enslaved, but we still carry the trauma of our ancestors. And not enough is done to teach us about intergenerational trauma, I think, and to tell us, to teach us the story of how others have rightfully claimed reparations and have not felt any shame about it. And it's so important, like the book that you've written, Pastor Turner, to help break down some of those myths that people have about reparations. When we come forward, I want you to give us a couple from your list of 100, particularly those that individuals can do, because I think it's important for those people who may feel overwhelmed by reparations to have some practical things that they can do in their daily lives. So, Pastor Turner, your new book that comes out next week, Creating a Culture of Repair, Taking Action on the Road to Reparations. says that you have the longest list of reparative justice actions anywhere. You acknowledge that the California Reparations Commission or committee came up with maybe 10 or so more than your list, but share with us some of those individual action items. Because I think sometimes when people think about reparations, they think it is the purview of the government or some big institution. But you've broken your book into sections and you give individuals some to-do lists that they can follow if they want to get involved in this movement. So give us a couple of the ones that you think are going to resonate the most with readers of your book.
Thank you for that question. One of the first things that my book tells individuals they could do is something you mentioned earlier, which is researching their family history to know what exactly their family story is as it relates to racism in America, chattel slavery in America, and to if and when they find out about that in their family history, to make amends for it. Additionally, we need to have a serious understanding that white privilege is real. And a part of that repair is white people acknowledging that such a thing exists. You cannot fight a problem that you don't even acknowledge is happening or happening. Notice, I didn't even say they had to admit they were racist, but just admit that you, as a white person in America, you have privileges that non-white people cannot take advantage of at all. And the third one, there's several in this section, but I think you asked for three, is to support Black-owned businesses and nonprofits. How awesome would it be if we had affiliate members of historical Black organizations, of like the NAACP, the Urban League, PUSH, National Action Network, as being people who are not Black, as affiliate, not voting, but affiliate members who can support the work of civil rights institutions and Black-owned business. And I have to give the last one. I know you asked three, I gave you four. Decolonizing your bookshelf. You know, how many white families have books on their bookshelves written by Black authors, right? You know, to decolonize your book, or for people who may be Black, but they may be a Candace Owens Black. You know, they may be have a colonized mind. They may be like the governor, like the lieutenant governor candidate in North Carolina. Decolonizing your bookshelf to include people who have an emancipated mind frame to have in your library.
Well, they can start by decolonizing their bookshelves with a copy of your book that's out.
That's right.
On April 24th. Next week, the book comes out and it's available in bookstores and I'm sure online, everywhere books are sold. Julianne, last question for you. Pastor Turner said, acknowledging that white people enjoy privileges. Jane Elliott, anti-racist advocate, did a lot of work around white privilege. We know Robin DiAngelo has done a lot of work around white privilege. A friend of mine wrote a book, did a podcast a couple of weeks ago where she says certain Jewish people or some Jewish people enjoy white privilege. And she was deemed an anti-Semitic author, and a talk that she had scheduled for Columbia University was postponed. I believe it was actually canceled. So even the notion of white privilege for a lot of people is like calling them a racist. Why is that term so triggering when it has been indisputably proven that there are privileges people who are white enjoy over people who are Black, people like the three of us who may have advanced degrees and be considered, I don't know, muckety Black folks, but a white person with a high school GED still enjoys privileges that we don't.
Absolutely. People are afraid of the truth. That's all. People are afraid of the truth. You mentioned one of the anti-racist authors, and there's Tim Wise. There are many. People are afraid of the truth, and the truth threatens them. Because if you're white and privileged, you don't want to own that privilege. I'm just doing my best, and you've got advantages. I remember back in the good old affirmative action days when a member of Congress said, why should the daughter of a doctor get privilege over a working class daughter of a white person? And the answer is there are still barriers. No matter, we all have all experienced, all kinds of things that occur because of white privilege. So white people put their feet on my property very recently. I'm gonna have to hire you. I said, why are you on my property? The woman said, prove that it's yours. She's in my yard, in my property. And then she said, well, I don't mean any harm. I just came to look around. I said, this is not a museum, itch. You need to get up off of my property before I call the police. And she said to me, who will they believe, you or me? I said,
Oh my God.
with this driver's license with my address on it, they will believe me, and I will have your behind incarcerated. And then I called somebody. I really didn't call anybody. I called a friend. I said, I need to get your legal services. It was just a friend, but I just faking. I said, what should I do? And she said, take a picture and call the police right now. So I put my camera up, but of course I'm such a klutz. Rolling dogs me out all the time. I can't talk on the phone and take a picture at the same time. But I put the camera toward them. They ran out of there. They totally ran. But the caucasity of being in my, this is not your property. So why are you in my yard? And we're just looking.
Well, even the boldness. Well, wait a minute. The boldness to say, if you call the police, you know who they're going to believe. Not you, the Black woman homeowner, but me, the white woman trespasser.
Exactly.
I mean, even to be so emboldened as to state that out loud.
And to one of my neighbor's credits, he ran over and he started yelling at. They ran, but it's like ridiculous. And I live in, off 14th Street, DC, highly whatever neighborhood. Everybody wants my house. I get notices about every other day. Will you sell your house? Answer, hell to the no, colonizer. But but that is the privilege that they have. And I bet you, depending on which police came, there would have had to be me showing my ID.
No, she's right. I mean, she nailed it. I mean, 99.9% of the time, that officer that shows up is more likely to take her word for it, and don't let her start dropping some tears. Then it's game over.
Lord, I must say,
so that would have been a completely.
And she made me. I had another policeman chastise me. It's a long story because I made the white woman cry.
Yeah.
I said, well,
we are out of time. So such an interesting conversation. This conversation of reparations. I am so again happy, Pastor Turner. His book is coming out on the 24th of April, and it's called "Creating a Culture of Repair: Taking Action on the Road to Reparations." Make sure you pick up a copy everywhere books are sold. Support Pastor Turner too. Tell us real quickly where people can find you on social and where they can join you on any Sunday morning.
I am on Instagram at Rev Dr. Robert Turner, REVDR Robert Turner. On Sunday mornings, I'm at the most powerful place on the planet called Empowerment Temple, 4217 Primrose, or etame.net, where we show all of our sermons live stream, and they're stored on our YouTube channel as well.
And that's Baltimore, Maryland. So if you're in the DMV, make sure you check out Pastor Turner on Sunday mornings. Thank you so much. Congratulations on your new book. Thank you for all the work that you are doing to lift up the issue of reparations. Thank you, Julianne. Always good to see you, my sister.